Hello and welcome. My next interview guest is Conn, talking about his new album Destroyer. How are you doing today, Conn?
I'm doing well, I think.
If anyone's wondering, Conn's not just super scared of me on video call. It's a lag that's just going to be there. We'll pursue it. So you released Destroyer, which has been out now for the past month. How would you describe your album in your own words?
I mean, I would describe it as very much like a testimony of the past year of my life, maybe the past 2 years actually, given that the past year has just been me sitting in my room writing it because of, COVID. It's also very much like a love letter to Belfast and all the all the things that I did while living there. And it's very much inspired by a lot of the times whenever I lived up there, I would take a lot of walks at night just because it was empty and it would just be very open and big to me. And I feel like it's very much trying to capture that kind of atmosphere. So that's what I went for, and it's just a love letter to all those experiences.
That's one of the things I loved while listening to the album was like you're going to Botanic or you're at Writers Square, and it was literally like, oh my word, this is here. And it's a really like beautiful testimony of like living, yeah, in a city per se, of a small city. It's not like London, but it's seeing even like someone's individual life within that area. And it's so lovely to see like that. And it's like, it's not just, a load of people in Belfast, it's a lot of individuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
like there we go. There's the lag kicking in.
that's the lag.
Yeah, I did feel kind of strange putting the direct references to the places like Writer Square, Botanic in, just because I felt it might come off as a bit too like corny or whatever. But like, I do feel like if I didn't, it wouldn't have come across that this is, like a deeply personal album to me.
Yeah, I get what you mean. But in all fairness, there is writers that talk about like LA and everything and write about LA. And it's like, I would say that's more cheesy than writing about like, just where you're from instead of like the whole LA experience per se. It does come across really, really personal. But how have you found the response to your album within the last month?
I've personally been totally overwhelmed by it because this was literally just something like I'm currently sitting in the room that I made Destroyer in. Like it was made in about a matter of like 2 months, I think it was, in this room. And it was just a really small thing that I originally planned to do to beef up my portfolio for my master's applications. And then the fact that it's just gotten such a huge amount of praise from local outlets and like my peers in the Belfast music scene, it's really I did not expect it at all, really.
I mean, it's so interesting that it even just started off as a plan to be like, okay, I need a bit more like credentials and things. And it's just taken off so well. The amount of things that have been written about it and the interviews per se. And then, everything in between. It's been like a massive movement. And like, I'm sure it's half overwhelming knowing that you didn't actually do it to really produce an album like for yourself. You more did it for other reasons. So it must be a really overwhelming like kind of moment.
Yeah, like I did do it to kind of get more practice at songwriting as well as just to say like I released an album on my own just as a kind of point of principle. But yeah, it was really overwhelming because I didn't expect, because I did not know how to promote that thing at all. Like I didn't expect it to kind of, I mean, blow up is probably the wrong word, but it got more attention than I was expecting completely.
Yeah, I completely get what you mean. But other than that, the album itself is very, very piano based. And you are a very talented pianist, may I add. And like it starts off with the most grand opening. Do you feel like you will keep your music from now on very piano based, or do you also feel like, oh, I'm going to reach out?
I would like to keep it piano based because that's the instrument that I was raised playing and practicing. I've been playing it for nearly 20 years, I think, close to 20 years now. And I have in the past little while thought about learning more instruments, like learning really wild instruments. And I would like to incorporate that in my music further, but I would like to keep it very centered around the piano because that's the thing that I know how to play the best and I know how to write the best on it.
What do you mean by wild instruments?
I mean,
Like
I was
the
looking, I
kazoo?
mean, whenever I say wild, I mean, uh, actually, now that you mentioned that, that could work. But I was thinking like stuff that you wouldn't really hear in many other releases. Like there was one thing, because I listened to a lot of Joni Mitchell recently, I was looking at buying an Appalachian dulcimer because she uses that on her album Blue a lot. As well as that, because I've been listening to a whole load of Joanna Newsom as well, I want to learn how to play the harp, but every harp that I found like goes up to from like $5,000 to 37,000, so that's probably not on the cards right now. So I'm just trying to find stuff that nobody would think of using.
I mean, speaking of, being influenced to even like take on new instruments, by the way, I've assumed the harp is a very pricey instrument. I never assumed it was ever cheap, but what were your musical influences then surrounding the album in general?
Oh, let me think. There were so many because like I spent most of 2020 listening to a whole load of music that I had never really listened to before. But the main influences I think would have been Phoebe Bridgers, of course, because I literally discovered her like a month before I started writing the album, really, because Punisher just came out and that was a whole thing for me. Phoebe Bridgers was a big influence. Fiona Apple as well, because I mean, she basically dominated 2020 with Fetch the Bolt Cutters whenever she released it, and I could not stop thinking about it. Sufjan Stevens as well, because he's been a big influence on how I make music for ages, because he's huge, like he's a pretty notorious multi-instrumentalist, and I've always admired his way of writing music and writing lyrics. So I think those were probably the big three, but other ones would have included people like Bill Evans, Mitski, Debussy, St. Vincent, Kate Bush. It's just a whole array of different musicians that I really like, that I took influences from.
The list just goes on and on, but yeah, you definitely get a sense of Phoebe Bridgers in between. But I was reading some of the reviews for the album, like Yo Magazine produced a review for it, and they described your music as poetry or poetry-esque. But how would you interpret your music being viewed as poetry? Is it, do you view it as like a massive honor, or did you not think that, or did you not have that intention going into it?
I mean, I thought of it as really insane because I'm not a poet at all. I tried and it didn't work out at all. Like everything I've written everything that I've written as like in a poetry structure has just been really terrible. I mean, it's improved gradually over the years as I've got more practice, but I just find it easier to write lyrics and set them to music because it has a kind of structure that I can work around. But for it to be viewed as poetry, I just thought that was really crazy, and I thought it was a huge honor, really.
Maybe it's just that you're not confined by poetry rules. You have the poet inside. Inside.
That's probably true. That's probably true.
So City Song was the first song on the album. How would you describe it to the listeners?
City Song was kind of a byproduct of me listening to a whole lot of Sufjan Stevens. I wrote that song it was kind of a therapeutic experience writing that song. I don't know if I could go into details about what it's about because it's a whole thing. But it's now how would I describe City Song more than that? I feel like I released it first because it encapsulates the atmosphere of Destroyer quite well. I did want it to kind of be the sort of thing that would act as a soundtrack to me walking around Belfast at night, and I feel like that kind of encapsulates that.
Yeah, back to, even just your hobby of exploring the city and having that, even I suppose that one song that it's like, if you had a theme tune walking around, it would be that. And then this is obviously paralleled by the very creative name of City Song 2. And you describe, in the album is described as a track based on acceptance. Did you plan your album to have such a circular kind of nature to it? It's almost kind of like a novel from being so like circular with it. And I suppose it even advances your album. That's like the thought that went into closing it off was there as well.
I did have a sort of idea that I wanted it to be linked by a common thread, but I think as I kept writing and, you know, putting the tracks into a certain order, everything just kind of fell into place, and it became a lot more narrative heavy than I anticipated it and intended it to, which of course wasn't really a problem. I thought that was a really serendipitous moment, but City Song 2 was not intended to be a follow-up to City Song at all. Just I called it City Song 2 because it had a lyric about a city, and I was just like, great, I'll throw that title on because it kind of links together a little bit. But it did kind of end up being very narrative driven, both musically and lyrically, just by sheer coincidence, I think. But yeah, I'm very happy with how it turned out, because I still have no idea how I managed to make it so tight.
I mean, it is even more amazing hearing that you didn't actually intend to be so narrative and so circular. And I think a lot of like talent and skill has really been shown, the fact that it's like, I really didn't mean to do this, but it kind of just came out this way. But on top of that, I have to ask, there's a lot of different like instruments shown throughout the album, but did you play all the instruments, and did you mix all of them into the songs?
Oh, I did pretty much everything apart from Wednesday Night Bar Scene and Down by Ryder Square. They were done for the Abraham's Daughter recording, which was actually nearly a year ago today. But it was done by one of my friends, Lewis Murray, who I was doing my degree with. He really graciously agreed to record it in the music hall at the music building at Queen's on their really lovely piano, which sounds completely out of place compared to my really terrible out of tune upright piano that I use for the rest of the songs. But it was done by him, and he did a really great job on those two songs. And then for the rest of the album, I did literally everything else. And I had a little bit of guidance from him for like mixing and mastering for like City Song, which was probably the one that gave me the most trouble. But other than that, everything was done by me.
I mean, that is actually so amazing that you've taken all the instruments, you've taken all your lyrics, you've put them all together, and it's made such an amazing album for, well, essentially your first like solo like work yourself. It is really impressive to even see all that being put together by one person and being like, I created all of this. It's like, I can't tie my shoes. And so things like that, it's like, definitely, it's like, what have I achieved? But honestly, it is amazing. So going over the album, we also have Isaiah, and that has been described as the emotional centerpiece of this album. First off, would you agree with that it is like the emotional centerpiece? And then did you have any reasons for making it like a 7-minute ballad? Because I remember it was like Bohemian Rhapsody being 7 minutes was quite a statement at that time, where now it's like, yeah, songs can be 7 minutes, but it's not usually done.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with it. Isaiah is the emotional centerpiece, because whenever I wrote it, I honestly don't know how I managed to write it, because it just kind of fell into place all at once, and I was like, okay, this might be the best thing I've ever written so far. And I intended it to be about 7 minutes just because I have a thing for songs that are 7 minutes long. I just feel like they have a lot to offer. And with it being the emotional centerpiece kind of makes sense, because it was probably the most Phoebe Bridgers inspired song on this album, because I was listening to a whole lot of her and a whole lot of Sufjan Stevens whenever I wrote that song, and it was just kind of like it was just a byproduct of all that.
I mean, it is an amazing song, and to make it 7 minutes long, the fact, well, it just fell into place is once again just highlighting just how well this album flowed out of you. It wasn't really a task to do it. It was just more happening, and I think that's a really important part. And I think it can be really shown in the album that it wasn't necessarily, you know, forced to be made. It was really natural. The progression of it's so natural. The lyrics seem so natural, and it all just really ties in together. And certainly between the time and the lyrics, it is a beautiful rendition of your own experiences. How do you feel about being so candid with the album, with your own heartbreak and other topics?
I initially, it did feel like kind of a daunting prospect to put all of that into words and into such and make it so public with that kind of vulnerability. But like the further I got into writing, the more I realized that there wasn't any fear in being humiliated in that sort of way. And it was kind of like a therapeutic experience where I was just like, I don't really need to feel any kind of fear about writing this sort of thing. And this is a kind of testament to that, I guess. But I think the biggest fear that came out of it was being so emotionally open with songs like Isaiah, because that is probably like most of that song is true. Like I've romanticized it to death, but most of that song is based on true events, and being so open about that has just been very kind of daunting. But then the further I got into it, I was like, I don't need to feel fear over this, really.
Of course not, because all the best music is all just emotionally open and honest. And, you know, I mean, Beyonce literally wrote an album about her husband cheating on her and stayed with her husband. Like, you know, very candid things have been made within music, and it's never shameful to ever have that. But I suppose here's a question I have: is were you scared of the people you wrote it about listening to it? Because that's where I would probably be scared.
Oh yes, I was. I'm pretty sure. Well, there are some people who definitely have listened to it, who have had songs written about them on that album, and they probably know it. But at the end of the day, they probably don't care, because I've been open with them about everything, and they know that it's a form of like comfort for me to write these songs, and it's a way that I work through these things. And I haven't like called them out publicly or anything, so it's not really anything for them to be afraid of. The biggest thing was probably Isaiah, because like they don't know, and I don't know if they've listened. I don't know if they even knew. But yeah, that was a big fear. But I don't. Nothing's really come of it right now. There hasn't been any sort of confrontation over it.
Well, at the end of the day, is like, we don't know who you're talking about, and you know, you will know, but you're not ever going to be like, oh, this is who this was about and this who that was about. But it's more just, I suppose, even being so, well, as you said, you're comfortable enough because you've been candid with everyone besides the song within Isaiah, which is even just hard to be so openly candid, and not be not confronting, but not be face to face and still be so candid. Can just be a hard thing to do. But it is a beautiful piece, and I don't think anyone would be offended. As you said, like, nothing's come from it. So you've been performing from such a young age. How do you feel like you've grown as a performer from, you know, early on, because you started playing piano, and you were just described as a performer from a very young age. So how do you feel like you are now to then?
My early stuff was riddled with a lot of anxiety and fear, because I was playing very by the book, literally, because it was all classical pieces, and I was playing in front of people who probably didn't really, they weren't very what am I trying to say here in the nicest terms possible? They were I don't quite know how I'm supposed to say it, but I was playing a lot of classical stuff from that young age, and the audiences weren't terribly familiar with classical stuff, but they enjoyed what they heard me play. So that was definitely very encouraging from a young age. But as I grew, I kind of started to find my own sort of playing style, and that was probably late into my teens. It was whenever I actually came to Belfast that I kind of started branching out more into different styles of music, and I really started experimenting with jazz. And my first proper like singing gig was like 6 months ago, so it was very much like well into the writing process of Destroyer. So it's still very new to me, the whole singing and songwriting gigging thing, but I'm still comfortable relatively in a performance space, and because despite it all being in all different styles, it's all just the same sort of thing to me.
Do you think you're moving away and branching out from classical music? Do you think you'll ever actually go back, or is this kind of like, all right, I've adopted where I want to take my training and I don't really feel like the classical scene is me anymore?
No, I do feel like the classical scene is something that I very much am still involved with, and I still actively play classical stuff, and I'm still actively learning classical stuff just because I was raised on that and I love it to death. It is just a case of me trying to expand my own musical knowledge by doing all of these styles simultaneously, because of course I'm still doing classical. I'm trying to branch out and write jazz stuff now, because a lot of the stuff that I've written after Destroyer has just come out as like in the style of like a 50s jazz standard, which wasn't something that I expected at all, but it's just really cool nonetheless, because this time last year I had my knowledge of jazz was absolutely terrible. But the singing songwriting thing has just been something exciting, and I don't know how long I'm going to work with that, but it's something that I definitely do hope to keep on along with everything else that I'm doing at the minute, because I don't plan on leaving anything behind right now in terms of the different styles that I play.
Well, busy enough for you, but you've been writing songs since you're 17, and it's taking you to 2020 to actually release any of these songs. So where one is maybe the rest of them, because I feel like you are just a person who is just writing and writing and always like scoring out new songs. And why did it take so long to get those songs out of you?
Well, the songs that I wrote at 17, I actually wrote an album whenever I was 17, but like it was awful. It was genuinely so terrible. And I keep looking back at the lyrics and finding them just scattered around, and I'm just like, God, why did I even write this? And because they were so bad, and I knew they were so bad right from the get-go, I completely gave it up for a while. It was actually early 2019 I started writing songs again, and the first song I wrote after that big long hiatus for about 2 or 3 years was Wednesday Night Bar Scene, which was inspired by it was in the comments section of an Instagram post by Florence Welch. I saw a poem by Emma Buckley, who did the review for Destroyer for Queen's Radio, which was a brilliant review. And she is a brilliant poet, and I just saw everything that she had written in literally an Instagram comment, and I was like, this is incredible. I want to write like this. And I wrote Wednesday Night Bar Scene that night in about 10 minutes.
I mean, that's even so amazing that you were so inspired by someone and then they were inspired enough to actually write a review for your album. It's once again, a really lovely circular story. I'm seeing a theme here.
No, it was really weird, because I didn't know Emma whenever I saw that poem, and I happened to meet her again like completely by chance about a year, maybe less than a year after. And whenever Wednesday Night Bar Scene came out last May, she was like, this sounds a lot like a poem that I wrote a long time ago. And I was like, oh my God, it was you. You were the one that inspired that. So it was just totally by chance that happened. It was just a weird coincidence.
It's so strange, but also so lovely that that did happen. So you released Abraham's Daughter in 2020, and we saw some songs that were included in Destroyer, like Down by Writers Square included. But why did you not add Class of 2020 and Sacramento Hymn within Destroyer? I know Sacramento Hymn was more was instrumental, but it was beautiful all in the same.
Yeah, Sacramento Hymn is probably one of my favorite things that I've ever written. Like, I literally wrote it for a university module about a year, maybe 2 years ago now. But I felt like Abraham's Daughter was it was very piano led, and it was very indicative of what am I trying to say here? Abraham's Daughter was all about my experiences at university, and I did feel like Sacramento Hymn did fit in there because it was like encapsulating all the feelings that I had towards the end of my time at university. And Class of 2020 was kind of a follow-up to that, because the Class of 2020 quotes Sacramento Hymn towards the end. So I did feel like they kind of fit in with the whole Abraham's Daughter atmosphere and narrative that I was going for. I mean, I say narrative, but it was a very loose narrative that I was going for on that EP.
That's fair enough. But why didn't you add it? Oh wait, don't know why I'm asking the same thing twice. Sorry. When I'm glad I can make someone laugh. It's really nice to see it for once. But when listening through the album, I felt like it was a time capsule of your life, even especially because you say Class of 2020. It feels very much like you at this point in time. And do you feel like your future music is always going to be a capsule of you during that like period?
Yeah, I think so. That's why I found it more difficult to write stuff recently, just because like nothing's going on at the minute, so there's not really much of a life to have right now. So Destroyer was just kind of I wrote it like not like 2 weeks after I graduated, so it was kind of like a retrospective thing on all the experiences I had living in Belfast over the past year. And I suppose whenever everything starts to get going again, then I will start writing a whole lot more, because the little that I've written over the past while since Destroyer came out has just been, once again, me reminiscing on my time in Belfast. And the results have been good, but there's not really been that much because I'm kind of running out of steam for that.
I mean, it can be so hard with lockdown. It's like it's massively stunted a lot of songwriters and everything, inspiration, abilities, and then some find is like, I have so much time, I've written so much. It's really different for everyone, and appreciating where COVID does let down the arts is really important to respecting the process and respecting where artists are coming from, and how it's not just as easy as, oh, I've written a few songs. It's like, especially with your work, it's you experience and then you write it.
Mm-hmm. That's true, because I do feel like there's a lot of artists who have had a whole lot of output in the time since COVID began a year ago. Like, take Taylor Swift, for example, releasing 2 albums and then recording her entire back catalogue. Like, I couldn't even dream of doing that, because I literally just wrote about 8 or 9 songs and was right, yep, just threw that into an album. But it's I think it's more difficult for newer songwriters like myself, because we don't have a lot to go on at the minute. Like, more experienced songwriters have years of experiences to draw on for their writing, especially right now. And I don't really have that much. So it has just been kind of like stop and go for me, especially during this time.
Well, Taylor Swift is on a completely new level during this pandemic. I have no idea what I really can't understand it, because it's just an amazing feat to record 2 albums and then, then re-record the rest. But obviously, it's not the end of you doing songs. And when this all lifts again, we'll have a lot more process you'll have a lot more going for your musical process. but you talk in She Hangs Brightly about this is where your story ends. So Conn, tell us your story of your favorite part or favorite lyric of this album for whatever reason, music or lyric wise, any of it.
Now, let me try and think of what songs are on this album, because I was that invested in it for so long that I've left it alone for the month and I've forgotten everything about it. But I think if I had to choose, it would probably be between two. Isaiah, of course, just because of how rich in narrative it is, and the context of it is just so deeply personal to me. But I think maybe edging it a little bit would be Russian Doll and the Jack of Hearts, because that song just kind of poured out of me out of nowhere, and it also has kind of the same deeply personal quality as Isaiah, but I just feel like the lyrics are very what's the word? They're very I don't want to say the word rich again, but they are very rich, I think.
The richest of lyrics. Well, Conn, it's safe to say your story with music does not end here. And you have made an epic impression with your first album, and we can't wait to hear more. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for interviewing me.
And make sure to check out Conn's work on Bandcamp, Spotify, and everywhere in between.
Okay.